In this podcast, Darrell West from Brookings Institute talk about the future of work, robots, AI, and automation. So stay tuned. So welcome everyone to Jobs of Future podcast. Today we have with us a very interesting guest, and we'll talk about his background momentarily. But very few folks we get a chance to interview who has actually vested in their background and their future and in really discovering this answer of jobs of futures. And Darrell West is one of those individual. And Darrell, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. And a quick background that I can talk about Darrell. So Darrell is the VP of Governance Studies and Director of the Center for Technology Innovation at the Brookings Institute. Previously, he was the John Hazen White Professor of Political Science and Public Policy and Director of the Taubman Center for Public Policy at Brown University. His current research focuses on technology policy, the internet, digital media, healthcare, education, and privacy and security. The center that he directs examines a wide range of topics related to technology innovation, including technology policy, public sector innovation, legal and constitutional aspect of technology, digital media, social networking, health information technology, virtual education, green technology. Its mission is to identify key development in technology innovation, undertaking cutting-edge research, disseminate best practices broadly, inform policymaker at the local, state, and federal level about actions needed to improve innovation, and enhance the public's media's understanding of the importance of technology innovation. West is also the author of, he has written 23 books, and one of his recent book, The Future of Work, is out, I think 2 weeks back, Robots, AI, and Automation. And his past works includes how technology can transform education, the next wave using digital technology to further social and political innovation, and tons of interesting, great work. He's also the winner of American Political Science Association's Don K. Price Award for Best Book on the Technology, and the American Political Science Association's Doris Graber Award for Best Book on Political Communication. With that, thank you so much, Darrell, for coming to the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Beautiful. And by the way, impressive profile. I think it's when I was looking at your background, I was stunned by sort of how much research and how much sort of content you have published around this idea of jobs of future. So why don't you walk us through your background? Like I'm sure I'm not doing justice to sort of completing the whole background of yours. If you can walk our listeners and viewers through your background.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I've been working for 10 years at the Brookings Institution, located in Washington, D.C. And prior to that, I spent 26 years teaching political science and public policy at Brown University. I've been working on technology policy for more than 20 years. I remember the time where I started to notice that governments were developing these things called websites, and they were starting to put reports online and contact information and starting to respond to consumers. And I thought that was a very interesting use of technology. So we put out a series of reports rating U.S. federal government websites on various dimensions of technology innovation, state government websites, urban websites, and then eventually we added a global comparison, kind of looking at how various countries around the world are using technology. And much to my surprise, I found there was just tremendous interest. Like there were tens of thousands of downloads of our reports. We did them over a series of years. So when I came to Brookings a decade ago, it turned out to be a perfect time from the standpoint of technology, because the technology has just really taken off over the last 10 years. You know, we've seen the invention of the iPhone, the development of various social media sites, e-commerce is really taking off. So technology is really transforming everybody's lives. So what I wanted to do in my new book on the future of work, robots, AI, and automation, was one, kind of look at the emerging technologies and talk about the trends that we're seeing there, but also talk about the broader societal ramifications. What does it mean for the workplace? Are robots going to take people's jobs? What's it going to mean for public policy, and how's it going to affect our system of education?
Interesting. Pretty impressive. So, what's if you can walk us through what is Brookings Institute, and what do you guys focus on?
Brookings is a leading think tank. So we are a research organization. We've been around for more than 100 years. So we are the oldest think tank in the United States. We look at public policy in a lot of different areas: American politics, foreign policy, economic studies, global development. We have a program that focuses on metropolitan developments. So it's pretty comprehensive in terms of the scope of research that takes place. I direct our Center for Technology Innovation, so I'm very interested in all the digital innovations that we have seen in recent years and the emergence of the growing digital economy, and just what that means, how it's changing the landscape, the new options it's creating for consumers, but also the problems that are coming up as well. So we focus very much both on the opportunities and the challenges part of technology innovation.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast. Interesting. And what brought you to this world of future of work? Like, if you can, because your background is in public policy, and like, what brought you to this side of the aisle?
Well, 3 years ago, I started a project on the impact of technology on workers' employment and public policy. And we put out a paper, a Brookings paper on that topic. And the response was just overwhelming. Lots of interest, lots of downloads of the paper. People responded. They wrote in with questions and concerns that they had about technology. So at that point, I thought, I should turn this paper into a book. And over the last 3 years, there have been lots of new developments, new technologies. Robots are coming down in price and becoming more sophisticated. We're starting to see them on factory floors as well as in warehouses. Artificial intelligence has really taken off. We're seeing AI applications in finance, in healthcare, in education, in national security. Literally every sector is being transformed by that. And so I just wanted to think about, what is this going to mean for us as a society? What's it mean for the economy? And how is it going to affect workers?
Interesting. And what were your find? Like, if you can walk us through your perspective about the future of work, and what have you found out, and whatever you can share from that perspective.
Well, there have been a number of studies about the workforce impact of technology and automation, and they range from a 14% impact on the workforce to a 54% impact. So obviously that is a very wide spread. And if we're at the high end of that number, it's basically catastrophic for every society around the world. Like, no country can really tolerate a 30, 40, or 50% negative impact on the workforce. But even if those claims are wildly exaggerated and we are at the low end of that, let's say the 14% impact on the workforce, I like to remind people that during the Great Recession, it only took a 10% national unemployment rate in the United States to produce the Tea Party and then eventually Donald Trump as president. So relatively small workforce impacts can have an outsized impact on our overall politics. And obviously, one of the hallmarks of our current era is a lot of economic anxiety. People are worried about their jobs. They're worried about their children and their grandchildren and what kind of lives that they will face. There are all sorts of privacy and cybersecurity concerns coming out of technology. We all saw the Facebook hearings on Capitol Hill a month ago, and all the issues that were raised there. So it's a very interesting time to be looking at technology and just trying to figure out what is it going to mean for all of us.
Interesting. And I think so. Whenever I read a couple of sort of previous historical events when either technology is getting into our system. When you talk about, say, getting from horse cart to a car, whether we talk about getting a disk drive to store your everything on your personal PC, or when you talk about just a personal PC from that perspective, in every of these sort of situations, there was like big brouhaha around, hey, there would be like, we'll go out of lumber, or will sort of, even like when we were colonizing, that hey, the city would be filled with a lot of horse poop because a lot of horse will come. How would we console ourselves from, like, we have seen some wild prediction in the past that hey, this will go over, but it has done everything but that. Like, how should we perceive these signature, and not get bogged down with sort of some of these past trends? Like, what are your thoughts on those?
People have made all sorts of wild claims about technology over the last 3 decades. I remember in the early days of digital technology, people were saying this was going to be a nirvana. It's going to basically empower the grassroots. We were going to have small d democracy flourish around the world. The technology would be liberating, and certainly central governments would not be able to control such a decentralized type of technology. That turned out to be completely off base, because governments did figure out ways to regulate technology. We've seen countries like China that put a lot of emphasis on that, and they're overseeing what happens with the internet in their country. But we're also seeing a lot of other countries try and figure out how to control the technology. We have seen the use of technology to help activists at the grassroots level in terms of leading revolutions in various countries. But of course, now, whenever there's a protest, the first thing the police want to confiscate is your phone, because they know that it has all your contact information, your electronic communications, your text messaging. So, they don't have to beat confessions out of people anymore. They can basically get all the information they want from people's cell phones. So we've seen lots of very positive images about technology, but we've also seen some of the darker sides of technology. So I think the key thing going forward is trying to figure out how can we get the benefits of technology without suffering the privacy intrusions, the security risks, or the job impacts that some people worry about.
Interesting. And I think so. I think this weekend I was at Corning. I took my kid to Corning's Glass Museum and all. And sort of I was looking at the town, and one thing what stuck to me was that if you look at these companies, right? So they, like say Corning, they have created an entire town out of sort of very small business getting some revenue, like big business but getting some revenue, and then they contributed pretty massively to local economy and beyond. And vis-a-vis, if you look at any .com based companies and any sort of new companies that are emerging, we always hear about like handful of folks creating a ginormous amount of impact. It doesn't translate that well to the masses. So from your vantage point, how is that a technology issue, or is that our perception of what business is nowadays issue? Like more of a cultural has changed, that where I don't have to give back to the local economy that much. Like, what's your vantage point on that?
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Business is certainly moving towards e-commerce platforms, and digital applications are the big growth areas. I mean, we're seeing e-commerce take off. There have been estimates that a number of malls around the country are going to be closing just because people don't need physically to go to a mall anymore to purchase clothes or other consumer items. People prefer to do it through online platforms. So that's certainly having big ramifications in terms of local communities and how that is playing out. In the United States, our digital economy is growing almost a couple percentage points every year. So, if you kind of project that forward over the next decade, it's not going to be very long until we reach a point where the digital economy comprises about 25 to 30% of the overall economy. And so we're basically facing a transformation very similar to what we faced 100 years ago when the country moved from an agrarian to an industrial economy. It was a very difficult process. There was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of turmoil. Workers were trying to organize and unionize in order to meet the power of the big corporations of the day. It took several decades to actually work through all those issues, but eventually we had a series of economic and political reforms that helped us through that transition. So we developed Social Security, unemployment compensation, moved towards mass education. In the United States, we did a constitutional amendment to add the income tax to the Constitution, and so that became a way to finance some of the new programs. There were a series of political reforms that made it possible to enact these policy measures. We expanded the electorate. Women earned the right to vote. We had direct election of senators. So there were lots of changes 100 years ago that allowed us to make that transition. We're pretty much at the same point today in moving to the digital economy, where in the book I talk about a lot of economic and political reforms that we're going to need in order to be able to navigate this landscape. It's certainly within our means to handle the disruptions that are going to take place. We're going to need to do worker retraining. We're going to need to reskill and upskill people so that they can qualify for the jobs of the future. But it's going to be a difficult time period. It takes a while for any society to work through those types of transitions.
Interesting. And that's a very interesting perspective. So I think when I talked to, like, I was talking to a Fortune 100 company a couple of weeks back, and one of their chief of staff, and I was discussing this sort of changing landscape of work, and he was telling me, Vishal, right, that at the age when reskilling a worker takes longer than the shelf life of a skill, then everything goes out of the window. Like I'm not able to sort of reskill my workers fast enough. So how would an executive like that console? Like, what are some of your suggestions and thoughts, or some of the best practices that you think that businesses or sort of me as a worker could learn from this evolution? Like, what are some of the thoughts that you could share?
I mean, that certainly is going to be the big challenge going forward. There's certainly going to be lots of new jobs created, including kinds of jobs that we don't even know what they are now. Certainly anything involving data, design is going to be an important thing. People having soft skills of communications and collaboration, those are going to be very important as well. But the problem is, the people who are going to be losing their jobs, including many people who currently have entry-level positions, they don't have the skills for those new jobs. And so we're going to need to really make a substantial effort to retrain them. I think community colleges are going to play a very important role, because they often are the institutions that educate first-generation students, immigrants, older people, poor people. So we need to put a lot more effort into community colleges to make sure that they're up to the task. Companies are developing their own in-house retraining programs. AT&T, for example, is a company that's been very successful in taking entry-level people from their call centers, giving them more technical skills so that they can provide the services and have better jobs. So there certainly are models out there of how we can do it, but we just need to understand there is going to be this transition. We have to make sure that people don't get left behind.
Interesting. And so how does I ensure, like, as a worker, like, what are some of the thoughts that you could suggest me I should do to stay relevant?
In the book, I talk about the need for lifetime learning. People are basically going to have to upgrade their skills throughout their lives, because people are going to have 5, 6, 7, or 8 different kinds of jobs, and they may be jobs in different sectors as well. In my case, I've had 2 employers basically in my adult period. People in the future are not going to have that experience. They're going to have more employers, they will have more different kinds of jobs, and they're going to need different skills. So the whole idea that basically we invest in education up through about age 25 is that's going to be obsolete. People are going to have to continually upgrade their skills. They're going to have to invest in education all through their lives up until the point that they retire. So it's going to involve a very different mindset than what we have right now.
Interesting. Actually, so I was talking to one of the sort of futurist, and he was telling me, Vishal, so today we have chefs, the future would be souppreneurs and sort of sandwichpreneurs. And his perspective was that the economy is moving from jobs to tasks in a way. Like we're going towards more gig-centric economy and all that. From your vantage point, like what are your thoughts? Like how is that true? And then what's the resolve considering what's happening today and sort of how we can connect the two dots together?
I think that is true. Like when I talk with young people today, I'm always surprised how they have to sometimes do 2 or 3 or 4 different types of part-time jobs to basically earn enough living to really make it now. That may be the model going forward. The idea that somebody has one permanent job may, which was certainly the case of my generation, that may no longer be the case. It's the whole point of the sharing economy. But the tricky thing in the United States is the sharing economy often means part-time jobs with no benefits. So it's going to be a question, are these people going to have sufficient incomes to be able to make it? Where are they going to get healthcare benefits? How are they going to plan for their retirement? So those are some of the policy issues that we face. And I think there are actually pretty straightforward ways to handle those issues, but we need to start having those conversations now because those are going to be very contentious subjects going forward.
We'll resume after a short break. This part of the podcast is brought to you by First Friday Fair, fastest AI-powered way to find your next opportunity. Check out the website firstfridayfair.tao.ai and find your next dream job. Let's get back to the podcast.
Interesting. And I think so one thing is so technology is disrupting even like how we are learning things now. Can technology help me learn this new emerging? Like, what are your thoughts on how can I use technology in my favor to pretty much empower me in this future sort of jobs of future?
Technology definitely can help you learn, just because people can live anywhere around the world and basically have access to this incredible diversity of electronic resources. When I was growing up, you basically had to physically go to the library and check out books. And of course, all this information is online, and that's a great convenience for people. People can access, the greatest minds as long as they have an internet connection. And we're at the point now where I think more than 2 billion people around the world do have access to the internet, and we need to close that divide so the other 5 billion people also can gain access. It's very important that they have that so that they can have access to all these electronic resources that are out there.
Interesting. And what role do you see government play in whether you call it public policy, and how does government help in smoothing this or at least softening the blow that the economy is facing or probably will face from this disruptive technology and sort of automation and AI?
I think the government has to play a role. This is not a problem that the private sector by itself can solve because companies are getting more efficient. Like if you compare the large companies today versus large companies from 50 years ago, back in those days, the largest companies had 500,000 or 600,000 employees. The big companies today may have 20,000, 50,000, or 100,000 employees, but nobody has 500,000 employees because you don't need that many people to scale up your digital platform. So what government is going to have to do is to help people reskill. Government is going to play a role in terms of worker retraining. The policy angle is going to be very important. We need to move towards portable benefits. Because if people are moving around to different jobs and different employers, they need to be able to take their benefits with them. Today, the benefit is attached to the job, and we need to kind of think about ways to separate the benefit from the job so that if people are moving to different employers, they're not without healthcare coverage. If they are underemployed, if they have one part-time job that doesn't provide healthcare benefits, we have to provide a way for them to get healthcare.
Interesting. And how would I think you talked briefly about community colleges stepping in. like how would the education needs to be revisited when it comes to, because I think I was talking to one of the guy, he's running an online platform, learning platform, and he's telling me that, hey, you know what, people don't understand that when you explain someone through online medium, you have to really even understand their psyche, that every 7 minutes they have to put in some blurb that is to regain their attention, capture the attention back, which was pretty easy when we talk about in a physical setup. And sort of, and I can't, and on the other side, I was talking to a community college, they were saying, oh, we are getting less and less funding nowadays, and then even with whatever we have, the industry is growing to such a massive scale, we can't catch up. Like, we can't get trainers fast enough, we can't get the sort of the content fast enough. So what do you think are some of the changes that these educational medium needs to make to sort of help us out in getting retrained in time?
I mean, retraining is going to be absolutely crucial, and that's the reason I was emphasizing the role of community colleges, because they are often the educator of first resort for many people in society, especially non-traditional students. Like, the traditional students are still going to four-year colleges, but there are lots of Americans for whom college means going to a community college. And what a lot of the community colleges are doing now is developing partnerships with local companies in their area and developing training programs that feed directly into those employers, because they want to make sure that the students are coming out of those programs with good job skills. So by working closely with those local companies, they can tailor their training to what is needed. The company itself can, once they hire the individual, can provide more specialized training if that is needed. So I think kind of seeing partnerships between schools and colleges and universities and local businesses is a way to help with the retraining part.
Interesting. And from your perspective, like, so considering in the age of robots, AI, and automation, as your book rightly suggested, how can I coexist with that? Like, so what do you see as the future of work happening? How would these two worlds live together, if at all?
Well, in the short run, and let's define the short run as, let's say, the next 10 years, I don't see robots replacing humans. I think the more likely scenario is robots and AI augmenting humans, kind of working with humans in a way that improves our capacity, improves our productivity, and makes it easier for us to do our jobs. I think there are parts of almost everybody's job that have some routine elements, and those are the elements that can be automated. The virtue of that is it actually may free people to focus on the higher level parts of their job, the more creative parts of the job, the parts that actually are more interesting and innovative. So, if we can kind of think about automation as a way to augment humans, that might help alleviate some of the anxiety that people feel about how automation is going to affect them.
Interesting. So I think one of the things that I was talking to recently with one of the Uber's learning executive, and they were telling me that, Vishal, one of the things that keeps the current learning and development people awake at night was primarily there's a lot of depression among the new entrant to the workforce, because what they have been taught in their academia and what they see in real world are totally two different things. They can't connect the dots together. And then the early incentivization sort of concept that, hey, even that is not in their favor, because right now they want something quick and munchy so they can understand what's going on. So that's why there's a massive depression going on with the youngsters getting into the workforce. What's your take on that? Like, are you seeing that from your research as well? What do you see?
Well, we have to close that gap between education on the one hand and employment. Some parts of education are very theoretical, very concept oriented, not very practical. And that sometimes makes it difficult for employers, because they hire people and find out they don't actually have the job skills needed to work at that company, and then the company has to do a lot of retraining right there. So we need to reform our schools so that people are coming out with the skills that are actually going to be needed in the 21st century economy. Now, this is not just applied skills. We're also going to need soft skills because the types of things that we know are going to be needed are great communication skills. We need people who can translate between the technical people and the rest of us so that the technology is accessible to everyone. Design skills are going to be very important. You don't want systems that are just designed by computer science people or engineers, but people who can relate to others, non-specialists, non-technical people. Apple didn't always make the best products from a technical standpoint, but they actually did make the best products from a design standpoint. And that's one of the reasons their products are so popular these days. So the design element is going to be very important as we move into these new technologies, just to make sure that people can use them and they understand what is happening with them.
Interesting. And I think I was talking about the intelligence, the idea of AI with one colleague of mine, and we're talking about that, how the definition of AI has been evolved, right? So when you talk about machine, right? So at one point it was a tic-tac-toe, used to be an AI. Then it became a chess player, a self-chess playing game, and now it's a Go playing AI. So in the age when sort of the machine's intelligence definition is evolving, and then from our end, even like humans, like we used to be at one point that the intelligence is how much we cram, now how much creative or sort of artists we are. And so do you think from your vantage point that machine and human intelligence would be a totally different phenomenon in itself? So they would not be competing, but complementing each other. So what's your thought on that?
Well, the goal should be that it be a complementary relationship. There are certain things the machines can do better than humans, but this does not mean that humans are going to be obsolete. Humans are still going to have the creativity, the ability to innovate, the ability to kind of take something that happened in one area and generalize it to another area. We have very good AI systems that can perform discrete and very concrete tasks, but it's still hard for them to learn in one area and apply it in a very different area. Like that is an area where humans retain a major advantage, and I don't really see that changing in the near future. Now, maybe 50 and 100 years down the road, things will evolve to the point where that's no longer the case. But at least for the next few decades, I think using computers to augment humans is going to be the way to go.
Interesting. And I think so if I wear my business hat and if I'm talking to a business, right? So one thing I sort of capture from the conversation, like if I consider cost as one of the motive for me to grow, then obviously I would prefer automation. I would prefer sort of automating things, making it more operationally efficient and sort of saving on my bottom line. On the other side, one thing that I'm missing out on is the creative edge. Every business has a business edge or business competitive edge, and that is primarily the art of the business. And the moment sort of I decide on the AI side, I somehow let go of that, those sort of discrete diverse opinion working together in sort of creating this hacks and creating this creative outcome that is helping my business. So what's your thought on that? That if I'm a business, which side should I adhere to? Like how should I resolve this idea between art versus like STEM as my business?
I mean, I think the art of the business still is going to be very relevant because that's the creative side of the business. That's the human side of the business. And when you think about businesses that are successful, they often get the art very well. And so even the technology companies that require, great technical sophistication in order to put the products up, they still cannot lose sight of the creative and artistic part of it, because you need technology that is accessible to people, that does the stuff that we want it to do. And so It has to augment humans in order to be most beneficial.
Interesting. And so, if I'm a business, like, is there any magic recipe for me that, hey, I should appreciate certain degree of sort of this intuitive or sort of this creative aspect of business, and certain degree of these AI and machines? Like, is there any, from your perspective, is there any best practice, or is there any sort of any stat that you could suggest me that I should keep an eye on when I'm thinking of my future or my business future?
Well, AI systems are developing a learning capability. And so what they're doing is, they will kind of look at a number of different situations, and then they will start to learn out of that and then start to apply that knowledge. So that is how the systems are getting better. Robots are actually coming down in price. People have told me that you can actually get pretty sophisticated robots today in the range of $25,000 to $30,000. That's about the cost of an entry-level person in the United States. And so the cost differential between hiring the human versus ordering the robot has started to disappear. And of course, robots can work around the clock. They don't get sick. They don't complain about the heat and the temperature. And so this is the thing this is one of the reasons why we're seeing a pretty major advance in the use of robotics in the manufacturing sector, in warehouses, and in other areas as well.
Interesting. And also, like, I was talking to this Department of Labor's one of the previous secretaries, one of their staff member, and we were discussing about this idea of that in Great Depression, one of the things that was golden was this unemployment office. So they created this office to support someone. They gave them barely enough incentive so they can sustain, and then they negotiate a price with businesses, give them some incentive, and make the connection happen. And they became that glue that connected this unemployment with some employment, and it stirred up the economy, and then rest is history. But I think his perspective was that nowadays people are working in their own isolation. Like, I'm sitting alone in my own laptop. I'm not talking too much. Probably if I lost job, I'm depressed. I'm sad. I don't want to see any face who is having a job. In that mindset, sort of, they say we have a lot of government programs to support these individuals in some ways, but they have to reach to us. Like, we cannot find these people somehow. What do you, like, from your vantage point, how do you see that resolve? Because I think Depression did a great thing that, sure, they have tested this model, it worked. But right now we are a lot more online. Even like our DNA is now crude that we just are more on our cell phone than sort of talking to each other and going to these offices. How would you see that it would help the future generation getting this job?
I mean, I think the technology is going to move in a more collaborative direction, because certainly the old model of people just sitting by themselves and engaging with the technology is already starting to go away. For example, in the gaming area, there are these massive online games involving hundreds or thousands of people, and it's a social activity. You're not just sitting at your own computer kind of in isolation by yourself, but you're part of a gaming community, and people love that. In South Korea, for example, it's incredibly popular. There actually are gaming offices where people go, and it's a major form of entertainment there. But I think the same thing applies in the workplace, that today's problems are interdisciplinary in nature. They're complicated. They're basically beyond the skills of any one person. You need to put together collaborative teams composed of people of differing backgrounds and with differing skills that can work together and solve problems that way. So I think technology increasingly is not going to be isolated, and it's not going to be isolating in the way that it deals with people, but it's going to bring people together to solve problems, because that's how we need to move forward.
Interesting. And I think that reminds me of one of the sort of conversation I had with one of the Deloitte's executive on work, and he was telling me that, Vishal, in future, because of broadband, I think you also mentioned partly in a couple of minutes back, that because we have access to broadband, someone sitting at a village in Tuscany with a laptop would be able to contribute with safe cognitive abilities as a guy going to a Manhattan neighboring office. So his perspective was, when the future is going sort of that fluid, even the border lines are fading away between the countries, and pretty much like everything is now so global. What is your finding? Like, are you seeing the same? Like, what's your take on that?
Everything is global, and certainly there are a lot of companies that have moved towards global supply chains. Most of the big multinational companies are global entities. They are not just a product of any one country anymore, and they see their audience as global in nature. So, it's one of the ways that, we're trying to take technology all around the world so that more and more people can get the benefits of it. We don't want technology to exacerbate inequality and create greater differences between people. There are certainly worries about that right now, but we need to keep developing the technology to try and minimize the way the technology pulls us apart and emphasize the way the technology can bring us together.
Interesting. Now, if we go slightly tactical about some things that businesses and we and sort of business government could do. So if we talk about, say, what are the steps that government could take to sort of secure its citizens and its worker to stay relevant and employed so they can keep paying taxes?
The thing that governments need to be focusing on is, one, the education process to make sure that schools are training young people for the jobs of the 21st century so that they are not instantly obsolete the moment they graduate from high school or college. They also need to make sure that benefits are portable, because people are going to be moving across sectors and across employers, and they need to make sure there's no interruption in their healthcare or in their retirement planning, even though they might have 6 or 7 different employers during the course of their job. One of the hardest parts is going to be making sure people have sufficient income. Inequality has been a big problem here. Inequality in America is at a 100-year peak or a high point, and that's certainly a challenge. So we just need to be thinking about public policy in a very creative way in terms of education, in terms of social welfare policies, and in terms of income inequality, because these are all the things that we have to address in order to make sure everybody shares in the benefits of the technology revolution.
Interesting. And what do you suggest a business should do? Like, what are some of the steps that businesses could take?
Businesses definitely have a very important role in going forward, in the sense that businesses are going to be crucial in terms of retraining. They are the people who are actually hiring most of the people. So we have to make sure that schools are producing students who have the skills that businesses need. Businesses are going to be playing a big role in terms of the retraining process. They're already doing that to some extent. I think that will probably become a bigger role in the future. People may end up having to work fewer hours in the future, and that may allow people to pursue their leisure time activities. Everybody has hobbies, whether it's music or art or culture or sports or whatever it turns out to be. Ideally, technology should make us more productive, and that may mean that we have to work less and that we have more time to pursue leisure time activities.
Interesting. And what would you suggest to a worker, an individual, what are some of the things they could do to stay relevant?
They have to constantly upgrade their job skills. That is just going to be absolutely vital. People who are aged 30 or 40 or 50 are going to have to be learning new things because there are going to be a bunch of new jobs that are created, but they're probably going to involve skills that people coming out of college right now do not necessarily have. And so just making sure that the skills of the employers and the skills needed by the companies match up is a very high priority.
Interesting. And I think, and one thing I briefly sort of touched on this idea of that, like, technology is more tempting to businesses nowadays. Like, they can do a lot more pretty quickly. The scale is significant, and it's making businesses more tempted towards using technology more and more. And suddenly now, like, I'm from a data end, and I talk to a lot of businesses around their use of data and how they're using intelligence in data. And many times I am stunned and stalled by the fact that they are taking even their core competency decisions through very data centric methodologies. And sort of, although I love as long as it's getting them good bottom line, but my anxiety point is you don't want to be washed with the next upgrade of the software, right? So you still have that category, sort of that edge of intuitive edge that you have created and kept. How could businesses resolve that? Like, how could businesses stay relevant and like not get tempted, or like what do you think businesses should do in future? Like, should, because almost everywhere we see and hear you talk about, many of the executives are, even their incentives are tagged with the fact that how much they are using technology for the decision making. So
I mean, what
what's your thoughts?
businesses have to focus on is really the data. It's like digital data are the contemporary gold mines. Like that's what companies want. That's what has value. But we also need to make sure that the data that are being generated are being used for good purposes, and that they advance society as a whole and not just a particular company. So, we would like to see greater access to digital data for the research community, because that's the way we can actually learn how to make these systems better. When you think about areas like education and healthcare, there are lots of data there. In the technology area, it's harder to get open access data. Most of the data are proprietary in nature. And so we just need to kind of figure out ways for, one, businesses to generate the digital data that they can use, but also make sure that the information is being used in a way that advances society as a whole.
Interesting. And now, so what's your take on the future of workplace? So we talked about work briefly. We talked about workers, how they would stay and stay relevant. What do you think about the workplace? Like, how is that shaping up in the future?
Well, I think the future of work is going to vary a lot sector by sector. Finance, for example, is an area that is already seeing a lot of automation, and that is likely to accelerate even in the next few years. The restaurant business is going to be transformed by automation. I mean, sometimes when I go into restaurants now, they hand me a tablet and I order from the tablet as opposed to from a waiter or waitress. So that clearly is going to make a big difference. In the retail sector, Amazon is experimenting with stores without sales clerks. So basically, it has software that tracks the item that you put into your shopping cart and automatically charges you for those items without you ever having to interact with a sales clerk. Autonomous vehicles are going to be hitting the road in the next 1 or 2 years. Certainly in the truck driving business, there are going to be a lot of autonomous vehicles. In the ride-sharing business, the Ubers and the Lyfts, they are moving rapidly ahead. So those are the sectors that I think are going to see the greatest changes. Education and healthcare, on the other hand, tend to be slow adopters of technology innovation. That's true today. That's likely to continue to be the case over the next 5 years. So there will certainly be a technology impact in those areas, but it's likely to be slower and less profound than what we see in some other sectors.
Interesting. And I think that's a very valid point. And I think you talked about autonomous trucks, and I think one thing that reminded me of a conversation about and this is I was talking to one of the executives at a staffing company, and his perspective was, so I was talking to them, hey, how people are getting retrained and retooled, like how frequently are you training someone for relevant skills and saving them from irrelevant ones? And his perspective was that many times folks realize after the fact that they're irrelevant, right? So most of the time, and I think one sort of story that narrates this all is, so I met this guy. He was given Employee of the Year award for 3 years or 4 years by a very reputed company, and he was a speech to text analytics guy. And he gave me his and then he was let go, and I just took his resume and gave it to one of the premier company that is empowering Apple, and I say, hey guy, this is the executive. He was the best guy for the company. Go and have quickly recruit this guy. And that this new company told me that he's obsolete, like he's whatever he's working on is blah blah blah, right? So I talked to that guy and said, hey, Vishal, I trusted my previous company when they told me that I am the best, and they are keeping me busy enough that I thought that I am the best. Now I'm realizing I'm obsolete. How do how the technology resolve that particular conflict, like, or do you think from public policy end, or from should businesses own up to that their workers are employable as they head into the future? Like, who would be responsible for ensuring that someone is relevant?
Well, today the answer to that question is the individual employee is responsible for him or herself. So if you're doing well, it's because you're smart, you're creative, you're working hard, and so on. And if you're not doing well, the implication is you're not working hard enough. But I think we need to get over that as a culture, because there needs to be more of a social responsibility, because there are going to be smart, hardworking, and creative people who may not have a job at a particular point in time, or they may be underemployed. They may not be in a position that makes full use of their skills. And so I think we have to, as a society, figure out ways to bring everybody along, even during periods of unemployment or underemployment, because they're going to be very good people who end up in that situation.
I think that's a very valid point. And to sort of add to the previous conversation, so we did a brief research with young sort of up and coming talent as they're going inside the workforce, and we interview them and we ask them, hey, how many of you really ask about that whichever company you're joining is actually ensuring their employability, not really employment? Because employment tomorrow, you may not have employment, as you rightly said. It's not because of your reason, it's because of something else. But if and almost like no one said they don't care about the employability as of now. So I think that's a fair point, that today not everyone is. I'm responsible for myself, and I don't expect my employer to keep me up to date on what's going on. And the other thing sort of and this is we were asked to do help out through our AI solution that we're pitching in, was that, hey, sure, AI is disrupting jobs, but can AI help save it? Can AI ensure and tell me, Vishal, this it's like recommend engine, right? So people who have done that have also tried this. Can sort of the skill be commoditized in a way that I'm purchasing skill, and then they're saying, hey, by the way, your skill warranty is wiping off. Maybe you should renew that or something. In your research, have you seen something like this happening, or some inclination towards that?
I have seen that happening. And so, for example, in the AI area, AI is actually going to create a lot of jobs as well. So I was talking with someone the other day who's using AI to track elephant herds around the world, just to make sure elephants aren't too endangered and become too scarce. So, they use AI to kind of track what's going on and what the potential threats are and so on. But in order for those systems to work, you have to train the AI system, which basically means somebody has to go through a bunch of satellite imagery and figure out what is an elephant versus what is something else. It's a manual job. It's a little tedious, but it's a job that humans have to do in order to train the AI system. So that's an example of a kind of work that actually involves pretty big numbers of people that are going to be needed in order for the AI systems to function the way we need them to function.
Interesting. And how would a leader should sort of react to this? Like, if I'm a business leader, what would you want me to take away from this, like from your research and from the future of work? What should I learn?
Leadership is going to require a lot of flexibility, because there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in the overall environment, the political system, the economic system, the world of trade, the world of international commerce. Like, there's just a lot of changes that are going to be taking place. And so in all of these areas, leaders are going to have to keep their antenna up in a variety of different areas. The world is probably going to be less predictable going forward than it has been over the last 50 years. And so leaders are going to have to be able to spot trends, that may develop very quickly that have implications either for them or their employees or the companies as a whole. People need to develop probably a greater sense of tolerance for chaos and uncertainty, because the world going forward is likely to be more chaotic, not less chaotic.
Interesting. And from your research, like, what are you hopeful about in future? Like, what do you really are hopeful getting into this future?
I'm basically a technology optimist in the sense that I think there are amazing technologies that are coming to fruition these days. I think it is going to make our lives easier. My hope is that 20 and 30 years from now, people can basically work fewer hours, still earn a decent living, and have time to pursue their leisure time activities. And I believe that if we make the right policy choices now, we can actually end up, I wouldn't necessarily call it a utopia, but something that where most people are better off than is the case today. But the flip side of that is, my worry is that our governance is so poor today that we may not be able to enact the policy changes that are needed to help people through this 20 and 30 year transition period. And if that turns out the case, then we're more likely to end up in dystopia than utopia.
Interesting. And how could we save ourselves from getting into that into dystopian view? Like, what are some of the thoughts?
Well, the most important thing right now is just to recognize that technology innovation is accelerating. It's going to have massive consequences for society, for economy, and for governance. And we need to start the process today on how to handle that transition. Like, if we start today, the problem is perfectly within our capability of handling. However, if we wait 10 years or even 20 years, the problem is going to be too big at that point. We will not be able to solve it. So it's one of the reasons I wrote my book, The Future of Work, now, because it's perfectly within our means to deal with all of the issues related to technology innovation and automation, but we need to be having those conversations right now.
Interesting. Thank you so much. I think that was very, very useful, Darrell, and thank you so much for helping us understand the future of work perspective. So now let's spend a few minutes. We're almost at the tail end of the conversation. So let's spend a few minutes on your background, like in your journey. What are some of the things, some of the traits that has helped you stay sane and do all this wonderful work that anyone listening and watching could learn?
Well, the thing that I like to emphasize when I'm thinking back to my early adulthood and my educational experiences was just the value of mentoring. I was really fortunate when I was a college student to get terrific advice from people older and wiser than I was. As an example, this in the 1970s, one of my undergraduate professors was saying, you know, there's this thing called computers that are coming in, and you know, you really need to develop computer skills. So based on that, I took a Fortran class. I didn't do very well in the class. I didn't really like computers. I didn't understand these programming languages. But as a result of that advice, and as a result of taking that in some other classes, computers never scared me. Eventually, you know, I stuck with it. I developed more quantitative skills, statistical skills, and computer skills. And it turned out to be very valuable and helpful for my career. So I think for young people, kind of finding those mentors who can help them navigate what is likely to be a very turbulent world will be very important, because, you know, when you're 18, 19, or 20 years old, it's really hard to figure those things out.
That's a very, very, very valid point. So one more thing I ask all of our guests is to share one of their favorite read that they like and from your reading archives. Like, do you have any favorite read?
One of the things I'm reading right now is Walter Isaacson's book on Albert Einstein.
Very fascinating.
One of the geniuses of 100 years ago who just had amazing insights into the universe and scientific phenomena. And it's a really great book because it shows the human side of Einstein. It actually was surprising to me how much difficulty Einstein had in his professional career for almost the first 10 or 15 years of his professional life. Like, he couldn't get a job. He tried very hard to get teaching jobs, and it was just very difficult. Even after he published the famous papers that revolutionized the world, it was still several years after that point before he finally, got a major teaching position, and then, went on to great success. But it's kind of an interesting lesson to learn that even a genius like Einstein had professional difficulty, but was able to be persistent and to overcome those obstacles.
Fascinating book. I think I couldn't agree more. It's fascinating book. So thank you so much for suggesting that. So we're at the last but not the least section of our conversation. So if you want something that the viewer and listener should take away from the conversation, what would that be? Like, what would be a closing remark for anyone listening and watching and worried about the future of work and how it's shaping out to be?
I think the closing advice I would give people is just to be prepared for a wild ride over the next 10 and 20 years. When I was growing up, I was used to a lot more stability than I think is likely to be the case going forward. I just think we're in a period where there's going to be political instability, economic instability, and some instability in terms of the social system and the culture in general. There are a lot of changes taking place in the United States. There are changes taking place all around the world. But if people expect instability and change and can adapt to it, it can actually open up lots of possibilities. So as long as people understand what they're dealing with, I think it will help them navigate the future world.
Interesting. With that, Darrell, again, thank you so much for being really candid with your time and helping us understand what's going on and giving us a glimpse on the future of work. I would definitely, for our listeners and viewers, I'll put the link for Darrell's books. If you want to check it out, I do appreciate. And with that, Darrell, you're always welcome back on the podcast to share your journey. You're always welcome back to talk about the future books. Love to have you back, discuss the dystopian or whichever view how you describe it shaping out to be.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
I thought I was sick of home, but actually I was homesick. Never really knew that I would have to grow up so quick. I'm so uncomfortable, don't know anybody here. Just a couple dudes that I met once, that's it. And I go into the booth feeling nervous. Got butterflies in my stomach like I'm so worthless. Is the mic on? I don't know how to work this. Inside I'm breaking down, I hope I'm not up on the